in the room with me, and then Kevin Willey, our COO, is also on, and he's going to be recording. We're going to dive right in. We're going to speak for 2 hours. There's going to be some time at the end for Q&A. I don't really stand much on ceremony. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you want to send it in the chat function, that works as well. If you want to hold it to the end, it's up to you. We're here to present for you. We're here for your benefit. So however you want to roll with it is your call. We're going to talk about a few different things today. We do need to dive right in to cover everything. And in general, we're going to be talking about the plan and cost review report, the requisition inspection report, and then we're going to finish with something I added for you, especially, which Christina had asked me to add, and it's 10 things to look for in the field. And I actually was very pleased. I'm happy you asked me to do that because I was pleased with how it turned out. I hope it presents as well as it did as I was writing it. So the goal of today is pretty simple. We are going to take a plan and cost review and hopefully help you understand it better and what it is and how we put it together and what it is that we state in the report and how and where so that you can use us better. We're not here to train someone to do a plan review. That would take a lot longer than an hour. And we're not here to train you how to do a requisition inspection report. Moreover, we want to just have you use us better, use the report better. And whether you're very new in your career, somewhere along the line, or even far along, hopefully we can fill in some blanks as to what it is the plan review does, and best all, how you can use that report. So that's the goal today. KOW has been around since 1978. We're in most of the country at this point. Most of our work is plan and cost reviews and requisition inspections, which is today's topics. We also do a full suite of sustainability services, phase 1 environmental site assessments, and all the work is done in-house by our full-time staff. We're based here in New York. We own an office building in Smithtown that we bought a number of years ago, and that's our home base. Where I'm talking to you from today is our Manhattan office. We have a Midtown Manhattan office we've had for a number of years that serves a lot of local people that are inspectors and assessors and what have you. So let's dive right in.
I think, Joe, I just wanted to check. Joe, do you have your hand raised? I just wanted to see if you have a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I know this is a 2-hour meeting. We have a hard stop at like 2:55. So if we could just try and finish up by then.
No problem.
Let everybody know. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep, of course.
We should be good on time. Just to kind of step you back, you're looking at 2 1-hour seminars, but because they're together, the overlap saves you some time. So we should be in good shape on time. So let's dive right in. Understanding the plan and cost review. So when we do a plan and cost review, also known as a technical review report, a pre-closing review, an upfront review, etc., the number one thing we're looking to do is identify risk. And when we do our plan and cost review, we want to bullet out in the report a number of different things. Number one, we want to identify the issues. And that is going to be issues that hopefully are taken care of pre-closing. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's something that has to be taken care of pre-requisition 1, or maybe even later. For example, there might be certain environmental issues that it may take a number of months before that's a closed item. But we want to identify these issues. Number 2 is we want to identify the risk of the project and what we see as potential risk. So an issue would be, for example, that there's environmental soil to remove, and we're not exactly sure if it's going to be what they think it's going to be. If it's, no offense to people from Jersey or Pennsylvania, if it's dirty, it goes to Jersey. If it's really dirty, it goes to Pennsylvania, and that's more money. So we're going to identify those issues, things to keep an eye on. We're going to identify risk. What would a risk be? How about your plans aren't approved? We don't have approved plans from the building department. That's a risk. Is it a tremendous risk? Depends, but it's a risk. More than if it were an approved set of plans. So that's just one thing. The general contract's not signed yet. That's a risk. The construction schedule is really, really tight. That's a risk. So those are things we're going to identify in the pre-closing review. Number 3, we're going to summarize the project. We want to say that we bring the project from chaos to order. I do a lot of plan reviews still myself, and I actually really get satisfaction out of looking at a big, nasty, chunky plan set with 379 pages and whittling it down to a 30-page summary. There's something very rewarding with that because there's a lot of detail and there's a lot to go through, and you can't go through to the 30 pages until you crawl through the 379 pages. So that summarizing the project is the service we bring to you so that we can bring from chaos to order. I'll also say that it's interesting to me that when I deal with a lot of people at banks, I feel bad for a lot of the younger people that work at banks that were hired and brought in at times where it's so busy. You've more loans on your deals, on your desk, more of a portfolio, and you don't get to go in the field that much. Whereas when I deal with a lot of older people working at our clients, a lot of them came up in a time where they did go out in the field. They were encouraged to go out in the field. It was a little easier to go out in the field with terms of, OSHA and trainings, and they would be out there and they can talk construction differently because they've been on construction sites, 30, 40, whatever years ago. But we need to summarize this project. We need to make order of the chaos. A fourth bullet is project feasibility. And we want to look at that when we say feasibility, and we want there to be interchangeable parties. And that is a key, interchangeable parties. So let's just take the general contractor for argument's sake. I like to use pretty general examples when I teach and do seminars and webinars. So let's just say the general contractor said, I will build this building for $60 million. If that is the right number, if the market would say it's 60 million, if you put it out to bidders and you'd average or you'd get near 60 million, and 60 million is what they're going to build it for, then the good news is 60 million is your cost. The good news is if something doesn't go well in month 1 or 5 or 10 or 20, and we're doing our job as a monitoring company for the hard costs completed, paid, and remaining costs, then the numbers are sufficient so that GC could be replaced. They hit the lottery and they move to the Cayman Islands. We can bring in a new contractor that'll come in and say, yes, I'll do this for 60 million or whatever is left of the 60. Now, that's not quite as clean a divorce as I'm painting it to be, because if you have a contractor that leaves on bad terms, odds are the last few months have not been good. But generally speaking, if we've all done our part right, the documents, the schedule, the budget, the contracts, everything's in place so that people or peoples could be replaced, and those interchangeable parties is a key. Now, that's not to say that talent doesn't matter. It does. It's not to say that an A sub doesn't matter. It does matter. But interchangeable parties is our goal because that means that the documents are stronger than any one piece. And then the fifth bullet is successful underwriting. We want you to come back from your side of the table and say, did a good, smart look at this. Here's how the deal's lined up. We're in good shape. We've underwritten this well. We've planned this well. And I like to say all the time when it comes to risk, you could bet on the Jets to win the Super Bowl this year. You could absolutely take that bet. You better have a really, really good payout. I know we have Aaron Rodgers now, but the point is we don't mind risk. We just don't like surprises. So we need to have successful underwriting to know how this is supposed to go at each phase of the project. So what's our process? Pretty simple. We request the documents, we review the materials, and we visit the site, and then we follow up with the players. That would be the design professional, general contractor, whoever it might be. Issue our report and opinion, and then we usually have some sort of revision period. On our plan reviews, we have some plan reviews that are revised 0 times. Most are revised once. That's our preferable. Our preferable is here's our report. Sometimes our client will actually take sections of our report, like our executive summary and critical issues, send that to the developer and say, get to work on these things, please. Then we get the information back. Oh, we got a signed document now. Oh, we have a schedule now. Oh, we've got a survey, whatever was missing. And then we issue a revised report. That's our goal. We have some projects that are revised 4 times, 8 times, 15 times. If it's a tax credit syndication deal with a capital stack that has 8 different parties that we're reporting to, it could be 20 times. And that's just how it goes. But that's the general process for our plan and cost review. We do always visit the site. You might say, well, if it's a vacant piece of land, who cares? Yes and no. There's not a ton you can see on a vacant piece of land like you would on a renovation, but you can see things like curb cuts, overhead electric, nearby structures. If there's a church next door, a school next door, does that impact our weekend working hours? If there's an MTA subway line right there on the street that's elevated, is that going to impact how we're going to use cranes and how we're going to have a site safety plan to boom materials into the building? All those pieces are going to go into what we look for in the initial site visit, topography, you name it. So we always do a site visit, even if it's a vacant piece of land. So what do we review? Well, the most important 3 pieces are the plans, the specs, and the scope of work. Now, these are all very, very different, but very, very similar documents. And here's how they're related. The plans tell you where something is going to go. The specs tell you what is going to go there. And the scope of work tells you how much is going to go there. Let's just throw the scope of work out right now. If it's new construction, you don't need a scope of work. The scope is everything. That's a no-brainer. So a scope really comes in and play on a renovation. So let's just use an example. Let's talk about refrigerators. I like to use easy examples. Everyone has a refrigerator. So if we're doing a renovation project and we look at the plans are going to show us where the refrigerator is going to go in each of the apartments, in each of the kitchens. The specs are going to tell you that all the refrigerators are going to be Kenmore, GTX, 16 cubic feet, top freezer, Energy Star rated, frost-free, white finish with, elongated handles. That's exactly what you need to buy it. You could call PC Richards and buy that refrigerator if you wanted to. That's your spec. Your scope of work will say, we're going to replace 47 of 89 apartments, because maybe someone did an assessment and determined that a number of refrigerators were replaced over the last couple of years. So the plan, specs, and scope of work. If you wanted to know which would win out if there's a discrepancy, it's actually specs. The specifications actually legally have been proven to have the most teeth, but the 3 are related in that way. So what do we look for? Well, when we look at plans, number 1, and I think there's a lot of confusion out there in the industry on this, when people say full plan set. What does that mean? Well, here's how we look at plans. Number 1, the plans are going to be broken down into different trades. There's an architectural set, which has an A on it, a structural set, a site set, a plumbing set, that's P, sprinkler, HVAC, which is M for mechanical, electrical. You have all these different sets of plans that your architect is going to draw, and then your engineer is going to likely give dimensions to. So when we say a full set, we want to see all of the trades included. Well, why wouldn't they be? Time. They're going to need to be included to build the building. That we know. But for the sake of time, there is a such thing as a permit set. And a permit set varies by jurisdiction, but let's just take New York City as an example. You could build a new building in New York City, and you could get an NB, new building permit, and you'd only have to have site safety, zoning, architectural plans, structural plans, and a plumbing riser diagram. That's it. You don't need mechanical plans. You don't need electrical, sprinkler, elevator, full plumbing, landscaping, etc. You're going to need those to build, but not to get your new building permit, because the city will say how you heat and cool is not going to impact whether the project is approved or not. The structure is, how high you want to build is, but your heating and cooling method is not. So if very often we'll be sold on, oh, good news, it's a full set, they're approved plans. And I'll look at them and I'll see they're approved, but it's not a full set. So our question is, how complete are the plans? And generally speaking, your plans are going to go from 0 to 100%. So 5% plans is back of a napkin. This is the building I want to build. 100% is your building's done and you did as-built plans. So the question is, where am I between that 5 and 100%? So if you have a permit set, you're at probably 60% there. Then after permit set, you could have a full set, which would include all your different trades. Now you're at 70%. Then you'd have a bid set, you're at 75%, and that's good news. We can get pricing back. Then you're going to get to your coordinated set. Now you're up to about 85, 90% complete. So you're moving your way along. What's coordinated set? And by the way, you should use that term often. When someone goes, oh no, the plans are very, very far along, say, are they coordinated? And this is something, by the way, that's about to change beyond recognition because of AI, I think. Here's what a coordinated set is. A coordinated set is taking each of the different trades and overlaying the plans for common sense to work. So for example, what is a coordinated set means? It would avoid the following. If you have a mechanical sub who says, hey, I'm going to run a duct right there that's 12 by 20, and a structural sub that says, you're not, I'm going to have a steel girder right there, something's got to give. On their own, you'd never know that was a problem. But when you coordinate or overlay these plans, you got an issue. So they need to be overlaid. So who would win in that case? Probably your structural. And your mechanical sub's going to have to figure out a workaround. So that coordinated set is a very, very key piece because that's your actual construction set. Your bid set is not your construction set. You're close. The coordinated set is the for construction plans. And that is something that right now has to be done by people. I think that we're at an interesting moment that, mark my words, in 2 or 3 years, coordinated plans will be done by the touch of a button, and AI will do all of this. It'll order materials. It'll tell you if it's code compliant. We're at the crest of a wave with this because it's very time consuming now, but it's all on the computer. It's all something that AI should be very, very good at. If you're curious as to how the order would go, most projects will use what the MTA is always used in New York City. The bigger diameter you have, the earlier you go. So structural goes first, then mechanical, then plumbing and sprinkler, then electrical, then low voltage. So it's kind of like the smaller diameter you have, the more you're expected to work around others. But coordinated set for us, that's the for construction set. That's the one we see in the site trailer that's got the highlighter markers on it that will really give us an idea of the approved plans. The specs, again, we want to see the reasonable, and then the scope of work. Does that apply to what we saw in our inspection for the needed renovation? We look at a budget. More on a budget later, but the most common format is the American Institute of Architects G702 and G703. More on that in a little bit. We want to see the applications filed with the building department. What are the schedules or the backup? Are they complete? Do they match the documents? If we're looking at a permit application that shows 85 apartments and we're looking at plans that show 95, that's a problem. That's happened. We've had that happen before. And it happened, and we brought it up and they said, oh, that application was old. Well, we better get that corrected because the building department's not going to be too kind if they approve 85 and they come out to inspect and it's 95. We want to see the permits that have been pulled or issued. And again, remember 2 keys here. There's plans approval and there's securing permits. They're linked, but they're very, very different things. In our opinion, pulling a permit is very low risk because all you need to pull a permit is license and insurance. If you're a fire sprinkler sub and you want to get a fire sprinkler permit, you need license and insurance and you can pull the permit. There's very low risk as long as you have a worthy sub. But getting the plans approved, that's the feasibility question. That's the key. I had a project not long ago where the bank said, I'm really worried. They've approved the plans, but they didn't pull the permits yet. I said, I'm not worried. The plans being approved is everything to us. And it's not to downplay the importance of the right people pulling the permits, but let's take a worst case scenario. If you have the full plans approved and your GC walks into the building department and says, hey, I want to pull the permits, and they say, you're under investigation with us with a building you did across town, we're not going to give you permits. This happened, by the way, for us. They had to replace the GC at the 11th hour. They were able to. The new GC went in, they pulled the permits. So it's not that it's a zero risk, but it's not as much as the plans approval. So we had a project that was going in for plans approval. This is a worst case scenario, by the way. This is a unique one. And the architect applied the zoning to the plans just before it changed, but didn't get it in the time frame that it was grandfathered with the old zoning. And they had 3 floors more on the building blueprints than they should have. That's a worst case scenario. But that was an example of, you know, the hurdle to get the plans approved was a very real large one as a bad example. But anyway, that's how plans approved and permits being secured are two sides of the same coin, but the permits are much less risk. We're going to look at the construction schedule. Is it reasonable? Is it good for monitoring? Are there milestones on there? Do they have weather delay days? How about the winter? You know, we keep a really good eye on weather doing construction inspections. In fact, if you want to know if your super's worth their salt, whenever you go out to a construction site, just say, hey, what's the forecast for the next week? Any super who knows what they're doing, they'll tell you the 7-day forecast. They always know the weather forecast because it impacts everything. Temperature, hot, cold, impacts your project. Rain, snow impacts your project. What can you install? Roofing, facade, etc. And wind. Can't do facade work, can't do crane picks. You know, all those 3 things impact your project every week. So we want to see the construction schedule. Is it reasonable? Does it include some real delays for weather? How does it look for the winter? Is it a perfect setup of schedule, which we're never a fan of? We're actually going through a project right now with our interns. We do this every year where they look at the last 12 months of projects that completed at KOW. And they prepare a Google sheet that we then crunch the data, and it shows original schedule, and why, and original budget, actual budget, and why. And that schedule piece is really interesting because when we start to talk to someone and they say, well, I'm going to build that in 18 months, we say, that's 24 months minimum. We have real data to show you. And, you know, the schedule conversation is always a very interesting one. You know, it's very rare that people come back at us hard and say, oh, no, I'm going to do this in 12 months. I don't know what you're talking about. Very, very rare. But often when they do, when you start to lay out the pieces, you say, well, your foundation is going to be done in 4 months. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Then superstructure 6. Yeah. All right. We're up to 10. And you start putting the pieces together. All of a sudden they start realizing, okay, maybe 12 months is a little aggressive. So we want to be pretty reasonable with the schedule because it doesn't do us any good to say, yeah, that's a reasonable schedule if we feel that's not enough time. Because again, we're not looking to create problems, but we don't want surprises for you. We look at the property survey. There's various types, right-of-ways, utilities, utility availability letters. Do we have what we need? Water, electric. We had a project a number of years ago. They went to get utility availability letters. Turns out there was a mistake on mapping. There's no gas service. They had to put gas service from a side entry and change where the gas meter room was in the cellar. That's a very big consideration, utility availability letter. Phase 1 environmental site assessment and property condition report. We do both of those reports. We know them well, but we always want to review them if they're prepared by others when we're doing a plan review, just to make sure everything's been included or considered in the scope of work. You know, if we look at a property condition report and they say, let's say for argument's sake, we didn't do a site visit because it's a rush. I'm just creating an example. If the property condition report says the roof is shot, you need a new roof, and we're looking at a renovation scope and they're not touching the roof, red flag. So we want to make sure anything in these third-party reports are addressed appropriately in the scope of work. Appraisal, We don't often get that. When we do, we'll just put, sometimes they'll have some good data about historical data or the building particulars. Architect's contract, most importantly, are they involved during construction? Are they approving the requisitions? Are they doing a substantial or final completion of the project? Geotechnical report. So that's a report on the existing soil, soils, water, environmental, logistics, rock, clay. Basically, the bottom line for us is we want to make sure there's a link between the geotechnical investigation and the structural plans. And if you're thinking, well, it'll be really good if the structural plans said right on the structural plans, these are based on the geotechnical report prepared by such and such. Exactly. That's exactly what we want to see. We love it when the structural plans actually cite a reference of the geotech report, because now we know we're conceptually building something on what we found out there in the geotechnical effort. The general contract between the owner and the general contractor. Does the sum in the contract match the budget? Is the schedule aligned with the schedule? How about retainage? I will tell you right now, the most important piece of the general contract is the attachments, which are the clarifications, exclusions, and exemptions. Those have the fine print. They have the little pieces of what is or is not included in the cost. We spend a lot of time on those. The other part I'll caution you is they're not usually supplied to us until the final signed copy. So very often, I'm not saying someone's trying to pull a fast one as a GC, but I am saying we'll review a draft copy of a GC. There are no attachments yet. And those to us have the details. Those are the really key details to make sure that there's nothing that's going to be a change order later or a delay later. We don't like those surprises. Okay, how about the budget? This is the big one. So first of all, we compare the overall project costs to other similar projects. And we look at it per square foot, per unit. We keep an ongoing live database on a Google document that we have, a Google share, and we crunch every budget we do, any plan review, all the budget information goes in there. And then we pull peer projects to see, do they line up where they should, by trade as well as overall. We summarize the budget by trade: masonry, steel, windows and doors, thermal and moisture protection. And then we compare it to percentages. We want to make sure that it's not front loaded. And this every once in a while will come up where, the bank will say, our client will say, well, the developer or the contractor said it's X per square foot, which seems like a good number, but I haven't seen the budget yet. And I'd say, that does seem like a good number. And then they give us the budget and it's front loaded, where the overall number is good, but their first stage work is concrete, masonry, very high. And then their end stage work, finishes, appliances, equipment, is low. So that's something we absolutely keep an eye on. We analyze individual line items and unit costs. Sometimes those are very difficult to apply an analysis because different GCs break things down different ways. Sometimes it's easy. If you said to me, I'm moving sand per cubic yard, I get you a pretty good number. If you said to me, I'm moving rock, I can't, because there's different kinds of rock. The geotech's going to tell us the thickness and the hardiness of the rock, and therefore the equipment that's needed to remove it is going to be different and more or less expensive. So the unit cost is a great theory, but it's hard to apply project to project for a lot of things. We analyze add-on costs like general conditions, profit, overhead, contingency. Are they percentages that they should be? Are they in a range that they should be? Those are things we look at after we go through all the trade work. The one thing I would caution, though, is remember that we're looking at budgeted amounts right now, not actual. So they've not bought out the project yet. Now they've bought out some of it. I would say to you, for most projects, that's a ground up project. If they're shovel ready if they're ready to go, they've probably bought out 60% of the budget at least, because they probably already bought out excavation, foundation, superstructure, maybe facade, windows, temp roof, and underground plumbing. You're probably at 60% right there. Now, if you even throw in framing, standpipe, rough plumbing, okay, now you're at 70%. Now you're getting even more up there. So the good news is, if you're shovel ready, you're north of 50%. Are you at 70%? Probably not. And you know, buyouts are part art and part skill, because number one, people that are good at doing this at the general contractor, they have the relationships, they have the knowledge, they know what they're doing. They're also trying to kind of plan their bets here. Take appliances. You know, if I'm building a building tomorrow that's going to take 30 months, I'm not even going to be ready to get the first appliances for 24 months. So do I want to lock in pricing? Well, if I lock in pricing, I might get a deal, but I have to give a deposit. That means I have to come up with some money. But then if they go up a lot over the next 2 years, I locked it in smartly. But if they don't, maybe I ended up giving up money that I didn't need to. So how and when you buy out is based on the timeline and what you think is going to happen with pricing. Now, the smaller GCs, they don't have this need for sophistication, but the big projects do. It's a whole kind of strategy and philosophy. And if you wanted to know about what happens to pricing and how you could turn on a dime, look at COVID. We had projects that penciled out just before COVID, and they looked like they were in really good shape for success. And then COVID hit. We couldn't get materials. Things went up 30% overnight. It was crazy. Another example is there was a insulation factory down in Georgia years ago that had a fire and lost a lot of material overnight. Insulation went up 15%. You couldn't have planned that a week before that. You know, and that, you know, what happened during COVID is a lot of projects look for a force majeure change order. And most banks were okay with that. The force majeure is like a force outside of my control. I had no idea that, you know, materials were going to go up 30% in a month, and they did. So most banks, most clients were like, listen, we're in this together. Let's figure out a way to get to the finish line. But remember that you're looking at budgeted, not actual amounts at the beginning, you know, which is why when we look at budgets and they say, you know, concrete, 2 million. Exactly. I get very worried because there's one number I know it's not going to be, and that's 2 million. So I need to get a little deeper to see how did they come up with that. Now, when it comes to buyouts, we want to see contracts, but even when we talk to the GC and they say, listen, we have to work out the finer points, but I got an agreed upon price for windows. Good. That's something. Like, that's better than just, I think it's going to be 2 million. If they at least have an agreed upon price, it's better than budgeted. It's starting to become actual. But we need to see where we are in that stage of things, budgeted versus actual. Contingency. So this is an emergency fund. This is unforeseen conditions. I hit a tank. No one knew there was a tank. No one told me there's a tank. There's no record of a tank. I got to remove a tank the right way. I didn't include that in my price. That's an extra. That's a contingency. I'd also say that for the most part, you could sell me on 5% contingency new construction because you don't have a building to worry about unforeseens, and it's a large amount new construction to build 5% off of. Whereas a renovation should really always be 10% because there's more behind the walls, floors, and ceilings that you're not changing that you may have to. So 10% might be a better number. What if you don't use this once you get out of the ground? Then you can use it for owner upgrades very often. Very often. Not always, but that's a good conversation we like to have with the bank. Hey, the project's, 60% done. They're moving well. They have some contingency. They want to upgrade some finishes in the corridor, the lobby, or not a bad idea. That's probably a good conversation to have with you. We don't like to have the conversation with you when we say we're 4 months in, we're not out of the ground, and the contingency's spent. That's not a fun conversation. We look at the bond and insurance. There's several types. Mostly here we're talking about performance and payment bond, which guarantees the GC will deliver. A letter of credit is another option. The one thing I'd caution is that this is usually included 100% funded with no retainage at requisition 1, which is very reasonable. That's very industry standard. What if the budget's too low? Well, then the project's not going to be completed. If the borrower defaults, can you complete the project with the remaining funds? No, you can't. That's a problem. So why would this be? Maybe they're being dishonest. Maybe there's funds coming from elsewhere. Maybe they're trying to save on their percentage of interest. Maybe they're uninformed about the budget, and cash flow is going to affect the progress. Liens may be filed, and completion is going to be a problem. So too low, you're going to have a problem right out of the bat. It's just going to be a problem from day one. What about if it's too high? Bank will be overinvested. If the borrower defaults, you've an asset valued at less than you funded it. That's a problem. Are they using funds elsewhere? Maybe. We had a project not too long ago. They were trying to do that, and they got caught, and it was not a good scenario. So if it's too high, we don't like that to have more money out than should be. What other budget issues are there? Well, for us, it's keeping in mind, are we looking at estimate or looking at actual? We want to see what the subcontractors are coming back with, because if they say steel's going to be 2 million and we get 3 bids in of actual numbers in around 2 million, that's a lot more valid than just an estimate, because they're telling you what it's actually costing. The street is telling you the real cost. We also need to remember it's not an accounting process, right? It's just a budget and an estimate and a budget actual at the end of the day. You know, it's a tough thing to get our heads around, but if we have, you know, steel $2 million, and then you see a sub and their contracts for 2.8, that may not be a problem, because their number might be steel plus some framing. Or maybe it's 1.9 and you think, oh, that's good. Well, no, they didn't even do all the steel. They're not doing the handrails. That's with someone else who's doing. So the neatness of trades doesn't mean that a sub's going to take that trade, entirely that trade, and nothing more than that trade. It's a lot messier once we start hiring out. Now, not all subs are messy, but overall, it's not really an accounting process to look at your actual versus your budget. If we all did our jobs right, including us mostly, we're in the ballpark. The ebbs and flows are expected and reasonable, and they're within range. And then, like I said before, we need to forecast for later trades. If I'm looking at a plan review today, I'm looking at painting that might not be bought for 2 years, or finished carpentry, or cabinetry. So we look at budgets that way in the peer groups to see what the cost trends are for these different subs. If it's front loaded, I kind of mentioned that before, numbers look good, but the beginning stages will have more money in, and that's going to be a problem. Very general line item values, I touched on that as well. A lot of times they're done to satisfy us, which we don't like that. We want to see actual numbers that have been vetted out. Even if it's a really good estimate, it's better than just throwing a round number just to satisfy us. Missing items. I've seen 3 budgets in my plan review days where they forgot elevator. And the reason they forgot elevator, 3 completely unrelated projects, was they used the template for a similar project they did that didn't have an elevator. And they just forgot it. And that was an issue. So missing items are things we look for. Under or overvalued items, obviously that's something we're going to point out if we don't think that they've accounted for the work properly. So that's pretty much what the plan and cost review is, the documents we review, what we look for, and most notably when we look at the budget. Part two, I'm going to shift into the construction loan monitoring. Do you want to take a minute or two, or just keep going? Probably, right?
I think we're good.
All right.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. So, what's the goal of the construction loan monitoring report? Bottom line, more important than any other number in this, if they default, can this be completed with the remaining funds? So people will think that the most important dollar value in our report is the cost to fund them this month. It's not. That's the second most important value. The most important value is what's remaining. We need to know they hit lotto and they move to the Cayman Islands. We have enough money in the budget to finish the project. Again, that's a little not real world, because if we're talking about a nasty divorce and the GC over the last few months have not really been working very hard and their subs are not working hard, and that's a different thing, but we want to make sure there's money remaining to finish the project. We want to reduce risk. We want to protect you. We want to monitor this asset/liability, this hole in the ground that'll hopefully someday be a completed apartment building. We want to make you money. And again, the most important value is the remaining funds. So how do we do a construction loan monitoring inspection? Typically, they're monthly. They don't have to be, but typically they're monthly, and they're in line with an overall requisition that's submitted by the GC. The GC submits that monthly requisition built on all the subs' requests for work completed. Now, our goal is to attend the owner, architect, contractor meeting. That's the goal. Sometimes there isn't one, but if there is one, we want to attend. We find we get a lot of good data when we attend this meeting with the owner, the architect, the contractor, the state, you, us, a sub, the energy consultant, you name it. A lot of good information gets exchanged. The OAC meetings are a great way to walk a building. We're responsible for our PPE, hard hat, vest, boots, etc. Typically, we'll walk first, and then we'll sit down and we'll meet. And we try to schedule the next inspection at the conclusion of that meeting. But it's not just the data that we're getting. We're trying to read body language, communication. If the contractor complains every month that the architect is taking forever to respond to RFIs, at some point we're going to get involved. We're going to say, hey, we see a bad trend here. What's going on? Is the architect in over their head? Do they just not have it staffed right? Do they not realize they're delaying the project? So we try to read these pieces of communication and body language. We're only there for a few hours a month. So a lot can happen between site visits. I mean, a ton can happen. So, if I go for 2 hours today and I go for 2 hours on July 18th, if you average out a job that's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and half day Saturday, I'm there about 1% of the time. That's it. So a ton happens between these site visits, which is why we interact with all parties. We want all parties there, giving their data, giving their information, giving their feedback, but really we work through the architect and developer. We don't direct the contractor, and we certainly don't direct the subs. That's up to the architect or the developer, but we'll certainly offer opinions, issues, comments, etc. with this development team. Remember, it's a site observation, not an inspection. An inspection would approve you to go from one phase to another. That's not us. So an inspection would be, you're ready to install your footings, you've got your rebar in, your form set, and your truck's out at the curb rolling. You're not pouring concrete until your footing rebar inspector comes out, looks at it, and gives you the thumbs up. That's not us. I could show up today. You're just finishing framing on your 8th floor. I show up on July 18th, all your sheetrock's installed on the 8th floor. I never saw any of the copper, electrical, mechanical, fire, caulking, low voltage, you name it. Someone did, but it wasn't us. We're there as an observer for you, not an inspector. What do we do if there's an issue? Well, there's different levels. Number one, discuss it, solve it at the meeting. That's the easiest one. We like those, but we don't like issues, but we like when they're that first bullet there. Number two, Discuss, solve a meeting, but mention the report, just so there's a written record, just so you get the advantage of reading what we want to say. Number 3, also send you an email. Hey, just want to make sure you saw in the report the following issue. Level 4, we're going to give you a call. Hey, we want to make sure you see we're concerned about this. Number 5, let's get everyone on the same page. Let's set up a call. Let's set up a Teams. Let's make sure we all know how we're going to solve this. And then level 6, very, very rare. We've done it twice in the last 30 years. Recommend no funding. We had a project in Queens. Jamie Patuchik, she's a fantastic inspector. She's a PE civil engineer. She had a project that was just going wrong. Contractor doing what they wanted. Architect very weak. It was a developer GC, so they didn't have any. They were doing everything themselves. Bank didn't want to hear it because they didn't want us to upset the borrower. It was a problem. She came to me and said, no one's listening to me. I've emailed. I set a phone call. They don't want to do it. I don't know what else to do. She's like, there's code issues, and now the balconies are being installed, and she was worried about the balcony railings. So I said, send one more email and tell them what you're going to do, and then recommend no funding, and she did. And it worked. It was not how we wanted to get everyone's attention, but it's our nuclear option. It never goes to that level, but it's there, I guess, just in case. What does a report contain? Well, first of all, the way we have our site observation report set up is 30 seconds versus 30 minutes. If you have 30 minutes, please read the entire report. If you have 30 seconds, page 1 has everything you need. So page 1 has site visit date, weather, conditions. We always note the weather. It's good to know that because it affects facade if it's wind. Like I said before, moisture, temperature. It's good to know what the weather is to know why you're completing or not completing certain work. Funding recommendation, change orders, potential change orders, contingency. Talk about retainage, stored materials, who attended the meeting. Then we have the body with our completed work, issues, construction defects, permits, schedule comments, and appendix. So how do we get comfortable with a funding number? Most of the time, it's an application for payment, which is an AIA, G702, G703. It's going to summarize the project totals, have the retainage, which is the holdback, previously funded, amount due, etc. It should be signed by the contractor and the design professional, the architect. Now, the owner shouldn't technically sign it. If you look at the G702, there's only 2 signature lines, contractor and architect. A lot of times the owner will give a separate letter or something. We like to see them on board with the number. In fact, we love to see them agree with the number. It's just another level of, yes, we're okay with that number this month. We don't need it, but we like it. Most items are drawn down for what's in place or will be by the day's end. And the goal is to hold the contractor accountable, but also, as importantly, to keep the cash flowing. That's the key. We want everyone to be paid due money. We want the plumber to leave on a Friday afternoon and say, I'll see you Monday. Not, I'm pulling my workers, I'm pulling my materials, I'm pulling my gang box. We're going across town to a site where we're actually being paid. That doesn't help anyone. That absolutely doesn't help anyone. Because now to get them back, delays and additional costs. There could be an owner's equity piece that's told to us by you, by the client. If it's something you want us to put into our equation, we certainly can, usually before the retainage is calculated. How is this done? Typically, the contractor sets the percentages and the architect, maybe the owner, signs an agreement. Typically, we're there as a representative in a monitoring role, and we don't sign the application for payment. Now, I say that's typically how it goes. Very often, we're helping set the percentages. Or the contractor say, I don't know, what are you comfortable with? And I'll say, well, you're probably 65%. Okay, I'm good with that. That's fine. we kind of don't care how we get to the number as long as the number is arrived at. If you say 65 and I say I'm okay with that, or I say 65, all I care about is my bank is represented that 65% is the right number on the requisition. Some items are what's called pari passu or on equal footing. So they're drawn down in line with the overall completion. So you're 18% done, you get 18% of general conditions. You're 37% done, you get 37% of general conditions, overhead, profit. It's fair, it's reasonable. It may not be perfect, but at least it's equitable for all parties. The more complete you are, the more you get those. Sometimes, particularly bigger projects, they'll have a carve out of general conditions that are heavier in the beginning when they're doing things like dropping a site trailer, setting up construction fencing, getting temporary utilities. Okay, that's fine. And then as we move along, there'll be a certain percentage each month that aligns with the requisition. Our report includes the requested column and then our payment recommendation. Typical hard cost contingency, 5%, 10%. Again, this is ideally for unforeseen conditions. New construction, 5% seems pretty typical. The 10, renovations, 10's better. To draw against a contingency, we want to see a fully signed by owner, architect, and contractor change order. We don't sign a change order. We don't approve a change order. We're told that all the time. Well, you have to approve this change order. I don't. But what I do have to approve of is the funding. And when I do my review, if I'm not comfortable with the change order for funding, we're going to note as soon as we get that change order, we have an issue with this. Pretty rare, but it does happen. And then we'll bring it up to the architect, contractor, and people will sharpen their pencils. So technically, we do not approve a change order. But by default, we do. Is it adequate? Is it reasonable? Are the numbers right? Is the unit cost right? Potential change orders. We also want to see those included and discussed. And remember, and we try to talk about it two different ways. There's a potential change order and there's a pending change order. And they're two different things. So I'll give you an example. If we show up on site and the contractor says, hey, we're a corner site, we may have to move our electric room to the side street entry. We're having a meeting with the electric company next week. That is a potential change order because it may or may not be one. Now we show up the next month and they say, oh, bad news. We have to move our electric room. We just don't know what the cost is going to be. That's a pending change order because it's coming. It's definitely a change order. It's just we don't know the cost yet. What about GC error, design error? These are going to be a conversation with you. Because usually what will happen is the change order will be funded and then their insurance will be sought after later on at completion. That's usually what happens to get it done. Designer error is a perfect example. There could be a designer error that the contractor issues a change order, it's funded, it moves ahead, and then later on, the developer will go after the designer, the architect's insurance, and get it recouped. But that's a conversation. Let's just call that a case-by-case basis. There could be a soft cost contingency or separate developers contingency. So how does this differ for a GMP or stipulated sum? So the two different contracts, which are very similar and most often seen, stipulated sum and guaranteed maximum price. Here's how they are similar and different. Stipulated sum is pretty simple. There's a number, they're going to build it for that number, period, end of story. So if the contractor says it's a stip sum contract, they're going to build it for $60 million, that's your cost. If it costs them 62, you build it for 60. If it costs them 57, you build it for 60. It's usually a closed book job, which we're not a fan of, because the contractor will say, look, you don't need to know my sub breakdown. All you need to know is I'm going to build this thing for 60. However, if there's a change order, like they hit a tank, no one told them there was a tank, there was no records of a tank, and they have to remove a tank, that's still a change order that's going to be in addition to the 60 million out of the contingency. because there's no way they should have been able to know about that pre-development. That's a stipulated sum. It's similar in a guaranteed maximum price, but in a guaranteed maximum price, typically they'll say it's 60 million. That's your ceiling. I guarantee it's not going to go over that. But if the contractor saves any money on the buyouts, they'll split the savings, usually 70-30, something like that, GC to developer. And in that case, it's an open book. So when we do a requisition visit, which we love open books, they have all this paperwork of their subs, the fire sprinkler, and elevator, and mason, and steel, and we really can get into the details of completion and numbers. In that case, if there's a change order, it's exactly the same. Typical change order, fully signed from the contingency. The contingency is not a guarantee to the GC. Every once in a while, we'll see where they'll put it within the line items of the budget. We're not a fan of that. That really shouldn't be, because it's not guaranteed to them. Now, if you called it an allowance where they're allowed to use it just to get the job done, that's different. That's not a contingency. Technically, a contingency should be outside of the line items as needed and approved for unforeseens. The majority of change orders and the contingency is for foundation issues, which is shovel in the ground up through the foundation being done. If it's not a majority, it's 50%. That's most often the surprises we have, particularly urban, infill, old area kind of projects. Yes, it can be used for upgrades later on in the project. Again, that's a case by case. And then what about value engineering? So value engineering is something that I'll give you one good example. There's bad examples, and people will not like value engineering because they'll think you're engineering value out of the project. So a good example would be, this happened recently on a project. They had a number in for, I don't remember what it was, 40 security cameras. And they built a building, and then the camera company, the company that was going to supply them, came out, and they actually put cameras up and put these devices up to see, do they need 40? And they didn't. They needed 32 because there was more overlap than they thought. They were therefore able to reduce the number by 8, and that was a savings or value engineering credit change order that the contractor issued. So that's an example of a value engineering credit change order. So retainage is a holdback applied to the monthly application for payment. Now in New York, as of last November, it's 5%. And then it could be reduced or even released based on completion. The one thing I would say is sometimes you'll see projects that'll say for deposits, there's going to be no retainage withheld. That's a little dicey. I understand conceptually that if I'm giving you steel or mechanical equipment or windows, and I'm just giving you material and you need to give me a deposit, there shouldn't be retainage. I get that, but that gets a little tough to monitor. And now that's kind of mixed in with the completed work. So that's easier said than done. So we try to look at in the beginning. If we see it in the general contract, usually we don't. In fact, what we like to see is a deposit log where a developer or contractor will say, here's who we think we're going to give deposits to. And then we can see, are you going to hold retainage on all of these? So sometimes it's not held at all, like bond, insurance, permits. But for hard money like deposits, we like to see it withheld. It's just a lot simpler. We'll also then track the reductions and the releases and get final waivers of lien at the end from the subs and the contractor. The retainage shouldn't be fully released until there's zero chance of callback. I mean, zero. So we want to see the buildings done. In fact, some projects will even hold some retainage for a year, because if you finish today, we need to wait and see how your boiler's doing in January. As for subs, a lot of time, the subs will get their full release of retainage if they get a final lien waiver, a warranty or guarantee, completed work, nothing outstanding, plus a month, which kind of makes sense. If you've got a concrete sub that's completely done, test reports are passed, no issues, layout's perfect, structure's complete, and now they're on to the next job. If you make that concrete sub wait until the project's done 2 years from now, that's really not very fair. So it's pretty reasonable that sub by sub, if we're all comfortable they're completely done, that they could have their retainage fully released. Because the GC is on the hook, essentially, but that sub certainly has a right to ask for a retainage release.
Ken, can I ask a question? I'm sorry to interrupt, just real
Sure.
quick. What is the, you know, I would say, like, what's the most common percentage you see for retainage?
So retainage used to be 10%, very common. New York City law made it that as of November last year, you cannot do more than 5%. So it's usually 5%.
Wow, okay.
The GCs will be 5% until 50%, and then sometimes it'll lock in an amount, or it won't change anymore, so that it'll slide down to 2.5 by the end. That's pretty typical. Or it's 5% until, like, say, 90%, and then you start tearing it down.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So that's a good question. So non-work in place requests. So just so everyone's on the same page here, and this actually causes confusion. A lot of times when I'll train new inspectors, they trip over this. And I said, look, it's very, very simple. Work in place is on us. That's our responsibility. Poured concrete, painting, chillers, roofing, carpets, windows, boilers, that's us. We are there to responsible to comment on completion. Is it what was planned? Is it industry standard? Is it waterproof? That's on us. Period, end of story. Everything else is a risk question because it's non-work in place. So that will be permits, mobilization, meaning they're about to mobilize, they're about to come to the site, off-site deposits, which could be across town or around the world, on-site deposits, which we can tell you if it's there, but whether it's approved for funding is a risk question, engineering, coordination, all of these things are non-work in place. We'd be pretty cocky to think that we're going to make this call. We're not. It's a call to you to say, hey, there's a non-work in place request. It's X, Y, or Z. What would you like to do? Now, you might say to us, what are you seeing out there? What's your opinion? We'll give you that, but it's still a risk question. For example, if you said to me, or not said, if I said, oh, if there's a project we have where they're looking for $1 million of off-site structural steel and it's in Georgia and the project's in New Jersey, I'd say to you, $1 million, how much is the structural steel? $100 million. Well, it's 1%. Seems pretty small. But if it's $10 million, it's 10%. What if it's $2 million and it's 50%? So it's a risk question. It's a question to discuss and see what's reasonable, what is appropriate for your risk appetite, and what's industry standard. On-site stored risk, of course, things in the building could be damage, stolen, sabotage, theft, etc. Off-site stored is different. Off-site stored is actually safer in the sense of it's in a warehouse, we assume that's lit, heated, cooled, temperature, humidity, security, locked doors, insured facility. There's some good comfort there. We always reserve the right to visit off-site stored materials if you'd like us to. That varies on if you want us to by how the market's doing. Right now, nobody's asking us to visit off-site materials. Absolutely no one. During the Great Recession, we were going all the time. All the time. So it's interesting how that goes. We'll do whatever you'd like. Now, I will say, nowadays, we're not going, but the owner is. And the owner's giving us, that's the collective us, photos, a report. So we are being represented as far as we're all on the same side of the table, but we can always visit if you'd like. And again, the problem with knowing what that means is your project can be in New Jersey and literally get materials from anywhere in the world. So I don't know what that offsite logistically will be until it comes up. We'll talk about things like working stock in our reports. That's material that's on site, that's ongoing, that's going to be in within the next 30 days. So it's like materials here, subs mobilized, they're working, they're installing, and that stuff, you're not going to see that next month because it's going to be installed. That's good. It's the same as on-site store materials essentially, but it's different to us because they're mobilized, they're working, and I don't expect to see that laying there in 30 days. It should be installed in 30 days or within 30 days. And then the other thing, and this became the language, of course, during COVID is, hey, I need a deposit. I need to give them some money for non-work in place to lock in pricing. We're not against it. Let's just have a conversation and be honest about what that means. So we want to see completed trade work, masonry, carpentry, doors and windows, with an emphasis on work this period. We break it by trade to present it to you, the reader and the user of the report. And we also talk about general conditions, etc. We talk about construction defects, workforce adequacy, and our template is standard, but it's customized for the fit of the project. We comment on permits, documents we received and reviewed. We like to get a lot of logs every month, submittal log, RFI log, etc. Did we get construction meeting minutes? How about inspections? Violations, stop work orders, utilities, anything else, anything we want to monitor and put on a possible risk radar for you, we're going to talk about all these things. You know, we might have a tough neighbor. That's part of it. We might have where we need to get road closures because to do certain deliveries. You know, things we see that are potential delays, potential change orders, they're going to come in here. We're going to report on them and say, we'll keep an eye on these things. Lastly, in this report is the schedule and the schedule section. So now what is the schedule, the construction schedule? Well, it's anywhere from one page. I actually should really rewrite this and say it's anywhere from verbal to they have a professional company prepare a 35-page schedule. So what do? We want to look at milestone completion. You started, congratulations. What's next? Foundation done, great. Then superstructure done, okay, keep going. Weatherproof, rough framing, rough MEP, closing walls and ceilings, punch list. This is generally your milestone completion schedule. Now, I could add layers to this very easily, but for the sake of this webinar, we want to look at milestones because they're very real points in the project where we breathe a little sigh of relief. When the foundation's done, big sigh of relief. When you're topped out, superstructure's complete, great. Weatherproof, all right, now you're really rocking and rolling because now you can work. Now you can work inside. Now you can put temporary salamander heaters in there. Now you're not worried about weather for rain damaging materials. You know, each one of these milestones gets us more and more comfortable. Now, we always want to look at the critical path. That's the recommended schedule. Most projects, critical paths are elevator, utilities, and long lead items. Custom facade, custom mechanical. By the way, you're going to see these in a moment when I do the 10 things to look for. We want to talk about previous delays, current delays, potential delays. 30-day look ahead. Where are you going to be in 30 days, Mr. Super? Miss Super, where are you going to be in a month? Oh, windows are done? Great. Oh, sheetrock up to the 4th? Great. Whatever it is. And then recent progress and pace. Let me just define critical path for a moment, just so we're all on the same page. So let's say you own an apartment, or you own a house, or you rent an apartment. Doesn't matter. Let's just say you have a bathroom and a kitchen. And let's say you decide, that's it, I've had it. I'm updating my 1970s yellow style bathroom and kitchen. I'm doing it. I'm biting the bullet. I'm going to do it. And let's say you decide to GC it yourself. And you hire Kitchens R Us to do your kitchen and Bathrooms R Us to do your bathroom. And your kitchen sub says, it's going to take me 2 weeks to do demo and 6 weeks to do all the kitchen work. So it's 2 months. Your bathroom company says it's going to take me 2 months to do demo and 2 months to build out your bathroom. That's 1 month. Right now, congratulations. You've established that your kitchen is your critical path. Because if your kitchen is delayed at all, you're in trouble. you're delayed. Your kitchen's your critical path. Your bathroom is not on your critical path. And your bathroom would have what we call a 1 month float or cushion. So if your bathroom person says, hey, I broke my leg skiing, I'm gonna be out 2 weeks. Are you mad at me? You'd say, not as mad as if you were my kitchen person. Because even with a 2-week delay, you still have a 2-week float left. Your critical path in this case is your kitchen. So when you look at a construction project, I could show you a $500 million construction project. And if we were curious enough, we could literally break down their entire schedule to what I just did. There's a critical path, or there could be several critical paths that are on the same duration. That's how we look at schedules. What's your critical path? Now, when you start building a project and you're doing your foundation, that's your critical path. You only have one path. You're building your foundation. You don't get to have a critical path until you've got multiple lines moving at the same time, multiple trades, etc. Just like you'd have bathroom and kitchen going on at the same time. So that's what a critical path is. So what do we do when we track our schedule? Well, we either use an S curve, which means you start a little slow, you end a little slow, and in the middle you move along, or we'll use a straight line, and we track actual versus 0 to 100% that you said you would do. So in this case, for example, the green shows that they're 10% done. Sorry, at 10 months, they're 25% done. And at 9 months, they should have been 25% done. They're 1 month behind. And what's funny is every once in a while when a contractor will be offended, how do you say I'm 1 month behind? I'll show them this. I'll say, this is why. And they'll go, oh, yeah, okay. I'll make that up. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll make up 2 months. But just by this, if you told me you started in September and you told me you're going to be done in 24 months, right now you should be at 30% and you're 25%. So we try to use this to show them this is nothing personal. This is just tracking against your master schedule. Lastly, what do we include in the appendix? Our photo log, application for payment, fully executed and notarized, lien waivers for the GC and or the subs, logs, minutes, reporting, a schedule as often as one is updated. And then we can include these items or not. We have one client in particular says, don't include anything. They send us the requisition directly. Don't include anything but your photos. Fine. We have another client who says, I want everything under the sun. Fine. It's whatever you would like us to see. And if we talk about it in the report, we'll always say, can be provided upon request. Okay. So any questions on the plan review? Any questions on the requisition report? We're going to finish now with the 10 things to look at on a construction site observation report.
We're good in the conference room.
Thank you.
All right.
Very
So-
extensive, actually, a seminar like this. Thank you.
All right. So I tried to think to myself, okay, and this is Christina kind of mentioned it to me, like, here's the challenge. So I kind of tried to think to myself, all right, if I'm walking onto a construction site, and by the way, these construction sites could be anywhere from big, small, large, city, urban, rural, anything, right? But I tried to think of like, what are like 10 things that I'd like to say, definitely take a look at that. Here they are, in no particular order. Okay, number 1, how to deliver. So now obviously this is going to vary based on what kind of project you have. Where is it? Are there neighbors nearby? Is it in a sandy area? Is it rocky? Is it on a hill? Is it in a city? Is it how to deliver? The strategy, the means and methods is something that is a big consideration for a super. So in this picture, just saying I need to get my framing material up to my 4th floor doesn't seem like that hard a thing. It's incredibly hard. You have an existing building with existing buildings on each side. So they would have to plan to boom up and put through the window their framing material. In other words, it's not enough to say, I know what the framing is going to look like, but how are you going to do it? How are you going to accomplish that? That's one thing to think about. How are you going to do that? That's my number one thing to look at, kind of the means and methods to end up with the completed project. Number two, try to think about what you don't know. Okay, here's an example of something we didn't know. This was a project that had sheetrock all along the wall. We assumed the wall went straight. They took the sheetrock off and they discovered a fireplace. Now, they didn't use the fireplace for a long, long time. Doesn't matter. Guess what's above the fireplace? The flue for the fireplace. So they had to do some structural work where the joists didn't go right over where the fireplace is to the wall. So in a renovation in particular, what could be there? What don't we know? And before that wall was removed, we did not know that there was going to be a fireplace there. And there's things that happen all the time that surprise projects of what you don't know. So I think the 10 thing to look for, number two, is what don't you know? What could be behind there? What could be uncovered? Anyone who's done any kind of renovation in their home might find, I had no idea there's another flooring system when I pulled up my tile. There you go. So what you don't know, that's one thing to look for. Number three, workforce. Get a good idea on what a workforce should be. How many workers are there? What type of work are they doing? Are they in different trades? Are they in one trade? Why does it seem that your sheetrocker is really, really slow and there's one sheetrocker there? Well, they're probably linked conditions. If they had 8 people there, they'd be flying along. So workforce. What's the workforce? Who's here? Who's coming? Who wasn't? Why aren't you doing this trade? Oh, they didn't show up today. So I know this seems like dreadfully obvious. All of these probably do. But what is the workforce and what is it needed to jump the project? For this kind of project right here, when they're doing the foundation, they probably had 15 workers. When this project's doing painting and tile, they probably have 20 workers. But during the middle part of this thing, when the structure's built and they're doing all the rough work, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, they could have 120 workers. So workforce is a big one. And if you can load up the project, load up the project. If it's, safe and you're not bumping into each other. Number 4, out of sequence work. Not doing things in the right order. It's not illegal. It's not code compliant. It's not an architectural faux pas, but it's weird and you shouldn't be doing it. If you know what you're doing, you should be doing things in sequence. If you get your tubs delivered and they're not ready to be installed, that's an out of sequence item. I didn't say you're a criminal, but I said you didn't have that as organized as you should be, because tubs in particular are delicate and they're big. You want to bring them in early so they're not moving around walls, but they should come in, get set, and get covered with plywood and protected. So out of sequence work, scratch your head. Ask why that is. Poor quality, things to look for. So in the top left there, you've batt insulation that they screwed through. That's not at all how you should install insulation. It's the flanges and the sides that are installed. They took away any R value that had, and they made a thermal bridge. Congratulations, you screwed up 3 ways. The top right, much bigger grill than they needed. The bottom right, horrible caulking job. And the bottom left, just a very poor quality waterproofing a parapet. Poor quality. If it looks ugly, it's ugly. And by the way, I could absolutely argue the opposite. If you have a project where you go, like electrical is a perfect example. If you see a really good electrician and you look at the sub panel and you go, wow, that just looks really, really neat and clean and 90-degree angles, good job. They're very, very related. So if you kind of go, that doesn't look great, you're right. It's not. Number 6, housekeeping. Seems like a simple one, but it's one of the things that goes when you don't do the other things right. The first thing that goes is housekeeping. Top left, nice and organized. Top right, nice and clean. Bottom left, bottom right, disastrous. What does that lead to? Poor quality work, injuries, incidents, accidents, damaged materials, stop work orders, rats, if there's food, cockroaches, just housekeeping goes, it's the first of many that are probably going to go. Number 7, unsafe conditions. This is not quality of work, which we just covered. Unsafe conditions. That top left is a tripping hazard, not a rigid barrier, at the 6th floor of an elevator shaft. Horrible condition. That bottom left, it's one of the 2 times in my career I actually yelled at a contractor, pull everyone off the job. They had someone standing up on that scaffolding that's wrong in about 5 different ways. Top right, demolition. An interior demo job is the most dangerous thing you can do in construction. Roofing second, facades third. Interior demo, very, very dicey work. Got to be really, really diligent. In fact, I'll be honest, that top right photo, you and I shouldn't be going anywhere near that. Because when we get in within 30 feet of that, the super should say, you're not going any closer. You don't need to, and it's not safe as an observer. And they're completely right. That we shouldn't be going anywhere near that. And that just looks unsafe. A lot of load, joists are compromised, unsafe. Bottom right, no rigid barrier. They installed the concrete, they didn't put up a barrier up at all 3 sides in this case. Unsafe conditions, look for it. And by the way, is the opposite true? Yes, it is. The big contractors, every one of their projects, the real big ones, they're all safe, they're clean, they're organized. Every one of them. Just go to any Turner site in the country. Clean, safe, organized. Because they know not only is that good for quality, it's good for schedule, it's good for not having lost days for injured workers, it's good for lawsuits, it's good for morale, it's good for everything. Number 8, critical path. So this is a good New York City project. And if you follow the math here, I have a construction hoist at the front of my building here. That's getting materials and people up and down the building during construction. That is temporary. That hoist is not permanent. It's temporary. If my building's above 75 feet, I must install a hoist. I don't have a choice. I cannot remove that hoist until my elevator inside is signed off and approved. So I need to get my elevator done, which means I need to get my elevator shaft ready for workers to do the elevator, which means it needs to be waterproofed with the proper power. I need to pay the elevator company to deliver the materials. I need to finish the elevator. Once I finish the elevator, I can remove the hoist. Until I remove the hoist, I can't finish the hoist run, brick, aluminum panel, window, whatever, which means I'm open to the elements. So along the hoist run, I can't finish inside the apartment, sheetrock, paint, floor, insulation, etc. So all these things lined up are on the critical path. So if you're thinking to yourself, so are the hoist run apartments the last apartments to be done? Yes, always. They always are. And this is why. You could finish this entire facade of this building and still see a hoist there. So critical path, elevator is typically your issue. Critical path, utilities. That's the other big one. This is a critical path for 2 big reasons. Number 1, utilities take a long time, a lot of signatures, a lot of approvals, etc. And number 2, you don't control it. The utility does. So the top left, we have a sanitary and storm drain line with that trap and a water line with a meter. Bottom left, we have gas piping and the main and meter. Top right, fire sprinkler, and bottom right, electric. Utilities and critical path. Pretty early on in the project, we're already saying, and I'd caution you to say, hey, tell me how you're doing with utilities. And a good super should say, all right, well, we've got water and sewer in, electric, and they should have an answer queued up. And by the way, you can only go active in your utilities based on common sense in what must follow what. For example, I gotta have water in order to have electric or gas, because what do I do if I have a fire? But in order to have water, I better have sanitary because I got to drain the water. And if I'm going to have, so it follows that you have sanitary and storm, then water, then your combustibles, which are your gas and your electric. So these things follow each other based on how they rely on each other. And then number 10, milestones. These are things to look for. So let me give you, again, before I gave you 5, I think I have about 10 now. I can give you 20 if you want. I'll give you 40. This is a pretty good list right here. And if you do nothing else, if you talk in these milestones, you're going to get a good schedule back from your GC. Groundbreaking. Shovel hit the ground. We started. Great news. Excellent. Good milestone. Number 2, foundation complete. Now we're building in the air. We like building in the air. Less surprises. Number 3, you're topped out or your superstructure is complete. Really, really good milestone. Number 4, your envelope is waterproofed. I didn't say your facade's done. I didn't say your brick's done. You have your first coat, you have your windows, your temporary roof, your envelope, your building envelope is waterproof so that you could work inside and run heating inside. So we're not subject to the elements anymore. Number 5, your rough framing's done. Studs, walls are up, framing's complete. Number 6, rough mechanical, electrical, plumbing work. Those two go together, but let's just keep going. Next one, walls, ceilings, floors closed up. Now we're home free. Now we are home free because now it's a finished job. And now, by the way, is where you should really start to clean up your job. Now you want it, because you're at that finished stage, you want it to be very, very clean because things will show. Rough work, they won't show as much. Wall, ceilings, floors close up, great milestone. It's now a finished job. Congratulations. Bring in your tilers, bring in your painters, bring in your spacklers, bring in your kitchen cabinets, etc. Elevator complete, excellent. Remove the hoist, etc. Substantial completion, and then total or punchless completion. And that's your final, that last one. So those are kind of, I hope that, Christina, that was kind of along the lines of what you were saying to kind of look for. I tried to get a picture for milestones, but I got a picture for 9 out of 10, which was not bad. But that concludes the webinar. I'm certainly available to stick around for Q&A. Thank you for watching and listening. And I know we're a little early, but we moved along. And if there's anything I could do, let me know. Thank you for paying attention, and here if you need anything.
Thank you so much. This was really super informative. And as you're talking and I'm listening to all of these different, like, just like warnings about, on this project this happened and on this project that happened, and we're a big proponent of trying to plan for everything. And obviously there's not one deal where everything is going to go wrong, but you really do kind of have to plan in the event that any of those things that could go wrong. Right. And so I wanted to ask you, I know early on in the presentation you were talking about, preparing for a general contractor, like just leaving the job for whatever reason and having to pick up where they left off. And is there enough money to finish the job? And is it a reasonable amount of money for another general contractor to come in and complete that? In your experience, how many projects have you seen where that has happened, where the general contractor has just like abandoned the project?
That's a really, really good question. It's very rare. It's very rare. And I think that everyone, there's good, smart people on your side of things that say, hey, listen, let's try to work this out if at all possible. We've had projects where maybe like an owner's rep would come involved and get really involved in running the job, but to remove a GC is very, very rare. It's your last ditch effort, and it's not fun, and it's not easy, and it's going to be costly. The one thing I would say is the few times we have seen it done, a lot of the subs would be kept on and work for the new GC, and they'd honor the pricing. Big help, big help. And, we're not blaming necessarily the fire sprinkler sub and the plumber and the electrician. They may have been fine and good. Sometimes it'll actually be more frustrated than anyone dealing with this GC. So keeping the subs on, big help. And then just the transition costs are going to be something. There's going to be a few months of bringing a new GC. There are new people. They're going to kind of sit with each sub. There's going to be change order monies there, definitely. But if you can keep the same subs on and have them honor the pricing with a new contractor, that usually is a lifesaver of the costs.
Right. All right. I mean, I know we have certain documents that protect us, you know, with regard to the GC and then the subs. That's good to know. I mean, I imagine it is probably pretty rare, but I'm sure it happens. You know, another thing that you had mentioned was looking at third-party reports that have already been prepared when you're preparing a plan of cost review. So is it something that would be helpful for us to provide you, you know, in addition to other, you know, due diligence plans, permits, you know, preliminary budgets, things like that, also to provide you with the appraisal and any phase one or environmental work that we have on the property as well?
Yes, definitely. Certainly
Okay.
phase one. Appraisal doesn't give us too much usually, but
Okay.
the phase one and a lot of times the phase one will have like really good historical docs and
Hmm.
you know, they might have some records of some environmental things we want to make sure are included. So yeah,
Yeah.
phase one's a key. I would say for our plan reviews, of every 10 plan reviews we do, we probably get a phase one for probably 7 or 8 of them.
Oh, okay. All right. So we'll
Yeah.
certainly send that because we
Yeah.
generally, well, in some cases, you guys are doing both.
Right. Right.
So you have access to that data, but we
Right.
will definitely make it. But sometimes, you know, borrowers will come to us with one already prepared that we're accepting. So
Exactly.
we'll send that to you. But so like for example, I know on this Jersey City project that you just did, I know you were looking for some geophysical documentation, which I believe you said pertains to soil mostly. I don't know if the phase one, you know, data that's in there is detailed enough, but it would that have helped in that situation if we would have I know on that Jersey City property you also did the phase one for us as well. So you have access to whatever information related to
Yeah.
soil
So
in there
actually,
already, but
they're two completely different reports. So the phase one environmental site assessment, for those that are, you know, don't review them often or whatever, the phase one environmental site assessment is an investigation report, which yes, it does a site visit, but really it's a record search, and it says you may have an environmental issue based on this was a dry cleaner, this was a gas station, there was a spill, you may have an issue. And then if need be, it'll recommend a phase two, which does testing and says you do have an issue. And then phase three, or the remedial action plan will say, here's how you fix it. So the phase one is really a record search of the environmental risk based on previous usage of the site and surrounding areas for the project. That's the phase one. The geotechnical report actually goes out and tests the soil and determines its bearing capacity, determines the soil type, the water table, the clay layer, if there's a clay layer, is it rock, is there urban fill that can't be bared upon, etc. We'll test it in a lab and we'll come back and say this soil can support X pounds per square foot or X usually tons per square foot. Then that goes to the structural engineer who goes, aha, now I'll design the building knowing what it could support. So that's how those two things are linked. So a geotechnical is very important in new construction and must be done for the structural engineer in new construction. What's nice for us is in New York City, for example, they're starting to post the geotechnical right online in the permit folder on DOB Now, so we can get it from there. But the geotechnical actually samples and tests the soil and its characteristics to determine the bearing capacity that the structural engineer would base the structural plans on.
okay, thanks. Yeah, that was really helpful.
Good.
Um, and then one other question that I have, because and I see Thomas has his hand raised, so I'm going to be fast. So the retainage issue that we have, we currently we have always our starting point has always been 10%, which from what you're saying, New York City has changed. What is it like the building like lien law that
No,
has that or they reduced it to 5%?
the state,
Oh, this New York
yes.
State.
Yeah.
And when was that? Like approximately, do you know?
That was in November. I
Uh,
should double
okay.
check and make sure if it was
Well,
affordable housing or all retainage. But
Okay.
that did, and again, I'm no lawyer.
Yeah.
But that's something to take a look at. Yes, that would change
Yeah,
this past
absolutely.
November.
I mean, we have one construction loan right now that we're wrapping up, but that closed well before that
Oh, then
November
you're
date.
good.
So it would
Yeah.
have been kind of grandfathered, but that's good to know. But we usually in the past have started at the 10% number, and then we kind of, we get a little creative with retainage, especially depending on, the quality of the project, the speed, and also, if we're noticing like risky things, we'll try to give pushback when borrowers are asking for us to release more retainage than we're comfortable. Um, but I think, well, what you had said, we have been doing like, for any line items that are fully funded, we'll release, and we have the final lien waivers from that sub, we'll release half of the retainage with that advance, and then half with the next advance. Just so that we don't release everything all at once and we still have control, just in case they come back and they're like, oh, we still have, this thing that we have to pay for in connection with that line item, or whatever the case is. So that way we have like just like a little safety net. But that's good to know though, like, what you were talking about, like that sliding scale, as things become complete. That's a little complicated. If it's 75% complete and we could release a portion of the retainage, like we just wait until it's 100% complete, the line item, and then that's when we'll start to give away a little bit of the retainage if we feel, comfortable, depending on the project. So we are kind of doing that, but I am gonna have our attorney look into that retainage, and if it is a state mandate and it's not just exclusive to affordable housing, that 5%, we may just, stop releasing retainage and hold the 5%, because it's really not a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's for every project, and then and it's been 5% in Connecticut for a long time, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, but it was past November that the state passed that, the
All right, yeah,
governor
I'm gonna
passed
look
that.
into that. I'm gonna look into that. But I'm gonna let Thomas ask his question now. I don't want to
Okay.
monopolize.
No, I just had just two quick questions, just based on your experience. With the new buildings being made, and especially in the New York area, I remember there was that, I think it was called the Climate Act or Climate Mobile Act, where buildings had to have efficiency and greenhouse and all that fun stuff with it. When we're doing these projects for new construction, have you ever seen a situation where a building has not met those standards? And what is the repercussion of something like that from a lender standpoint if we were to move forward with it and all of a sudden there's a backlash on it? Just wanted to see if you've ever experienced or heard anything in your industry about it.
We're gonna have to book another webinar for this one. No. Uh, so there were four local laws passed a number of years ago by New York City, the Greater Greener Buildings local laws. And one of them was New York City has their own energy conservation code now. So if you're building new construction, you have to follow the New York City. I think it's 2020 is the latest update. I think it was 2009 and 2020. So basically, answer one is new construction in New York City. You don't have a choice. You got to meet the New York City Energy Conservation Code. That's number one. Number two, they passed something else, Local Law 97, where any building over 25,000 square feet, you need to show your energy usage. And if you're above a certain benchmark based on peer groups that are similar to your building, you're going to pay penalties that are going to be larger. The out of whack you are, the more you're going to pay penalties, and they're not cheap. That started in 2024, this year, for buildings over 25,000 square feet. And then in 2030, they're going to make it even more demanding for those same requirements. When they passed this, they said that they estimated that 75% of the buildings subject to this will be fine in 2024, but only 25% will be fine in 2030. So it's coming very, very, very soon. If you do nothing, you're going to pay big fees. You're going to pay big fines. So that's a very real thing. So the code's one thing. The Climate Mobilization Act of Local Law 97 is the other, and that's for existing buildings. And then you have to do, the other thing is you have to do an energy audit every 10 years and report on your energy usage so they'll know, if you are compliant or not. And again, they actually, when they designed the fees, the penalties, they did it to be punitive in that they tried to estimate it. They tried to, that it would be applicable to if you did the work in a similar amount. So for example, if your building's out of compliance and you'd have to spend $300,000 to do windows and a roof, your penalty is gonna be $300,000. Like they tried to do it that way so you were incentivized to do the work. Didn't they just delay the compliance when yeah, okay. So it's still, everything I just said is correct, but they're not going to drop the hammer on you quite so soon because I think they're getting flack that people are saying, hey, we're trying, you got to give us a little leeway. So it's still here and it's still current, but you won't see those big penalties be paid quite as soon.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because when we have some moving through the pipeline, just wanted to, didn't want to see that like 2 years down the road, all of a sudden see an expense just skyrocket for them not complying. But the other question I had, and this is kind of like because I'm in the world of portfolio risk. Sometimes we'll have some value add deals, or a borrower wants to do some upgrades, and we'll see on like the DOT where the permits on the sidewalks, and you're talking about like keeping things clean and everything. When we deal like the mom and pops doing value add, when we see the DOTs pop up, what would be like an example of something where you think is very alarming for, say a building that's going from like 4 units to 10 units, so they get that tax code break and everything? Like we see a lot of like little increases in there. Have you ever been in a situation from your experience just thinking like, wow, this is really bad and maybe we should reconsider something? And like I'm looking at it from I know it's a credit risk type of question, but just wanted to get like a gauge with a lot of these 4 units converting to 10 all over the city. Have you ever had any problems, or if you've seen any like any hiccups in the market about these projects?
I don't think so. Not in the scenario you just painted. No, I'll say no. No, not in the scenario you just painted. I will say, you just triggered me. You said mom and pops. So it is absolutely true that the smaller the project, the harder it is for us. So we will have some of the small projects that they're fun to work on. They're good people and they're a good challenge, but sometimes they'll be like really, really questionable as far as their subs or their risk or their housekeeping. Those are the ones that are more work than the bigger projects that have qualified people on it that are properly running it and have the resources to do so. So I wouldn't say, I don't have an answer to your specific question, sorry, but I would definitely say like some of those smaller projects we get, they're as much a concern as the $100 million ones.
Okay, I just wanted to get a gauge on it, so I appreciate your feedback on it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's my questions.
I don't think we have any.
Yeah, I don't. Oh, okay.
Over here, right, guys?
Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, no, nothing over here. It was super informative.
Very helpful.
Someone in here may have said that this was the best, most beneficial training they've ever received.
Wow, thank you.
So yeah, no, it was really helpful for us, especially on the underwriting side. We definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, it really was very informative. And actually did not like, it was like there was just constantly like constant flow of information. Kept you really engaged just from like a presentation standpoint. It was really very, very good. I very much appreciate it. I appreciate you making the time for us on short notice, because really it was pretty quick turnaround. And I mean, honestly, I know you had said that there were some other topics that you also are really passionate about and that are part of your like repertoire. And I would really be interested to see what the rest of them are. So maybe there's something else that would be something that we would really benefit from as well. But this was terrific.
Yeah, there's about 22 of them that we do. Every one of them we wrote, we own, we do, no charge, just a good way to get in front of folks. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll do one of them and then someone will book 3 or 4 more. The other thing that works a lot of times, and you can drive the bus any way you like, is we'll just do 1 hour, it'd be like a lunch and learn. Sometimes people literally just be eating in a conference room and I'll just be talking for 50 minutes doing a 1 hour lunch and learn. So however you want to go, yeah, happy to do it. It's really our pleasure.
That's great. Great. And, we look forward to working with you. We have a couple of projects that are in underwriting or close to approval. So, and those are projects that you guys are doing have done or are doing the planning cost review. So we'll be working with you on these inspections that you're talking about, going forward and requisitions. So, and, we would also like to probably take a look at that list. I'm going to circulate it to the group and see if anybody has anything that, strikes a chord that they might want to
Great.
get some additional knowledge on.
Great. Sounds good.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll be in touch, and however you can get that the recording to